Hi, my name is David Kenner. I teach business law at the Bloch School at UMKC, and today it's my privilege to speak with Keith Copaken and Paul Holewinksi. Paul has a BS in finance from St. Louis University and a JD MBA focused in law and finance from St. Louis University School of Law. He has tremendous experience in the banking industry in general and in commercial lending in particular. He's got over 20 years of experience in the banking industry. Currently, he is CEO of Armed Forces Bank, the president and CEO of Academy Bank, and the president and CEO of Dickinson Financial Company. Keith Copaken has a BA in from the University of Pennsylvania with a BA in economics and a Master of City Planning and Real Estate from the University of California at Berkeley. He's a very successful commercial real estate developer, broker, whether it's leasing, development management, investment. Keith is active in the entire spectrum of the real estate service industry. And so what we're going to talk about today is the banking and commercial real estate issues associated with the new coronavirus. And so I'm going to start off with Paul. Paul, can you tell us what's going on with the Paycheck Protection Program loans from the SBA? How do these loans work and what monies are available?
Sure. Thanks, David. Paycheck Protection Program is part of the CARES Act, and it authorized almost $350 billion to go to small businesses. And it was designed to keep people employed. So just as the name indicates, it's really focused on the payroll. And the loan amount's calculated based on basically 2.5 months of a small business's payroll. It's designed to be a forgivable loan as long as the proceeds are used towards workers and keeping people employed. It can also be used for rent, utilities, and other items such as that. So the first round of PPP went really fast. I think it was exhausted in less than 10 days. And we're getting ready for phase 2 of PPP, which was reauthorized. I think it's $310 billion. And we've heard that is set to go live on Monday. So we processed quite a few applications for small businesses here in Kansas City. We're working our queue down right now, so we're ready to submit, many more when it does go live. So it's a great program, and it's a great way for the government to get money to small businesses in these very, very trying times. So,
what kinds of businesses are eligible for this program?
Eligibility is pretty broad. You need to be a small business. You need to have less than 500 employees. New guidance came out recently where private equity is not eligible. Hedge funds are not eligible. There's been a lot of news in the press recently about some public companies that took the money that had access to capital elsewhere. So it's very broad, but generally just under 500 employees and a small business. So we've been able to help quite a few local businesses and specifically restaurants.
Yeah, Dave, I might add that we encouraged, we're landlords and own a number of buildings in Kansas City, and we encouraged a number of our tenants, both restaurants, as Paul was mentioning, retailers, even a few office tenants, to utilize the program because, as Paul mentioned, it can be used to pay employees, to pay rent, to pay debt, and other matters like that.
Yep. That's right.
All right, let's switch gears. What's happening with loan defaults these days? Are you seeing an increase in loan defaults, or does it depend on asset type?
And what we're seeing on the banking side is not a lot of loan defaults yet. Candidly, we do expect them to come as we continue to head into a recession. So right now, it's primarily requests for modifications, and most of the banks, as well as the regulatory authorities, have blessed typically interest only for the next 3 months. Can go as long as 6 months, but Not a lot in the default area yet, but mainly because we're granting concessions around payments. Again, with the hope that we'll get to the other side of this, and then payments can resume.
Are borrowers at all trying to use the force majeure concept, that this is an act of God, in other words, that or that their businesses are closed by governmental action and therefore they shouldn't be required to make payments?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. We're not seeing a lot of that, at least in terms of our covenants within loan documents. But I do think within the real estate side, and Keith maybe would want to comment on this, that we're seeing tenants utilizing within the lease concept.
Yeah, I'll jump in. A couple things here. One with respect to the force majeure and loans. Loans really don't usually have that provision. I've never even seen a provision in a loan. You have to pay your loan no matter what. So that's, I guess it'd be nice. Maybe next time around we'll get some force majeure in those, but not anything that I've ever seen lately or in my 30 years there. With respect to the force majeure in the leases themselves, of course it depends on what the lease says, but by and large the force majeure addresses operations. So it excuses the tenant from having to operate. So even if force majeure could be applied to a pandemic, which there's question as to whether it can or can't, but let's just assume that it can, it really has to do with operations of the building or operations of the tenant. So the tenant does not have to be forced to operate. It does not relieve the tenant of their obligation to pay rent.
Right. Usually the lease obligations are independent of the operations, correct?
Right. Now, having said all that, it doesn't really matter. If people don't have money, it's hard to pay rent. And if people don't pay rent, it's hard to pay your debt service. So irrespective of what the documents say, there's still a situation that has to be dealt with. And I'm part of a ULI group, Urban Land Institute, which is a international group. And speaking a little bit about how Paul brought up the way that lenders are addressing the situation when the Great Recession of 2008 hit. Everybody agreed. Everybody's very slow to react. Lenders were slow. The government was slow. Everybody was slow. Here, that's not the case. People are very cooperative. I'm a person from Wells Fargo who's head of all their conduits across countries in my group, and people are addressing these things immediately with interest only or forbearance when necessary. So there's a real concerted effort, I think, right now for everybody, borrower, tenant, lender alike, to be on the same page and figure out how to get through the next 90, 180 days.
Well, can you guys talk a little bit about the bad boy clauses in non-recourse carve-outs and guarantees and loan agreements? Are these triggered if a landlord/borrower modifies a lease without its lender's consent?
I'll let Keith speak to the real estate. What we've seen, on the lending side is we've seen leases that have been modified. They violate covenants, and typically a loan document's going to have a bad boy. But just the way Keith referenced, hey, we're trying to work together here. Both clients, borrowers, landlords, bankers. We've not chosen to exercise any of those, because I think what's happening right now is people are really trying to do the best they can, and even if it's they're able to make partial debt service or continue to escrow for taxes and insurance and other things, they're doing what they can, and so we've not seen that come up in terms of something that we're wanting to enforce. Because now is not the right time for that.
Yeah,
understood.
Paul's exactly right. I'll just add in from the landlord or the investor's point of view. With respect to some of the smaller leases, we're making those modifications without really talking to the lender. Loan documents often have a provision that says, I'll make it up in this case, but say a lease is under 10,000 feet, you don't need the lender's approval to do certain things. But if we were to make any change, even rent forgiveness with a major tenant, we would talk to the lender first, make sure that they're in agreement.
Now, the way you as a community banker approach this, I assume it's different than the CMBS and institutional lenders approach some of these things. Can you contrast the different approaches and how they might act, and whether they can act timely as to a request from a borrower for some of these changes?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think as a community bank, we're more well positioned to be able to react quickly and grant relief that's appropriate for the situation. Again, we know our clients, we know these properties, and we understand the difficulty that many are going through. So we actually have developed a process that kind of fast tracks we call them COVID requests. And so we look at those twice a week. It's just a short form memo that our officer puts together. And unless it's request is really out of line, we're granting everything that's coming across our desk. So, but I think it's a function of again knowing the properties, knowing the clients, and they're on our balance sheet, and so then we can make decisions pretty quickly.
How about you, Keith? Are you seeing a different approach from the institutional lenders or CMBS lenders that you've dealt with?
Paul talked about the advantages of being a community bank and having it on their balance sheet, and that's really the key to the puzzle here is on balance sheet. So when you're talking with a community banker who actually knows the asset, knows the borrower, has a good relationship, lives in the town, they are quicker to react and feel like they have a stake in the outcome. I'd say the same thing for a larger institution where it's on balance sheet, where there's someone to talk to, and you probably have a relationship with them, so that there is that same, won't call it the same level because Paul and his bank and other community banks have an extra great level of service, but I'll call it, for the sake of discussion, the same level of service. The issue with respect to when it's off balance, when the lender sells, or if it's a conduit loan, the issue is that there are special servicers to talk to, because it's a regulated loan, and so it's not just the lender's decision. The lender then has to get others involved, others who are not connected, others that are not familiar, others that are just looking at it as, hey, did I get the return on my tranche, on my piece of the pie? And that's a lot more difficult than being able to call up Academy Bank and talk to someone who really understands the asset.
So that would slow things down then in terms of trying to get lender approval if you're a landlord and your tenant wants to modify the lease, I assume.
Slower than a snail.
Right. Back into the loan modifications. What kinds of loan modifications are lenders doing as a result of this coronavirus crisis? And are there any extra requirements that lenders are imposing in connection with these loan modifications and the accommodations being offered to borrowers?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest one being granted, or the most consistent one, is a 90 days interest only. And again, just try to get through the second quarter. Most of our requests, started in April, and they'll run through June. The regulatory agencies came out with some guidance for banks that basically, if the loan was current and you granted relief, that you didn't have to count it as a troubled debt restructure, which is important. Because then it isn't, you don't have to file call reports with amount of TDR. So basically it's not a problem loan. And so most of our clients that asked for COVID relief brought their loans current at the end of March, and then we began, an interest only deferral period through. It will take them through June, and then we'll give them an opportunity to look at it again in July, and then hopefully operations have improved. But if not, then to enter into another interest-only 3-month period. So that's the majority of what we've seen. We've seen some requests for, in addition to for complete payment deferral, some of the harder hit industries such as hotels, restaurants, were more akin to asking for that kind of relief, which we've truly understand, given that product type. And then the maximum relief that the guidance provides is that for us to be able to go 6 months. So really, by the end of the third quarter, if the situation hasn't improved, we expect that's when we might see loan defaults in other more serious workouts. But for right now, it's relief starting with 90 days, going up to potentially 180 days.
Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit, Keith. What's going on with lease defaults? What kind of lease defaults have you been seeing? And then talk a little bit about the independent nature of the obligation to pay rent under the lease as well.
So we've been lucky so far in our portfolio that we're dealing with, in that we have no hotels. So that would be the first hardest hit asset, because all of your revenue is coming from the hotel or from room nights, and if no one's able to go anywhere and your hotel's closed, I mean, there's obviously you turn off the complete spigot of revenue, so there's 100% revenue loss. The majority of our product is office, and so of those, we have very, very few that are looking for rent deferral. We do have a number of restaurants and a number of retail, but by far in the minority of the portfolio. And I would say, if not 100%, almost 100% of those are either not paying, or we're actively talking about rent relief and how that would work. And what has started as force majeure or other reasons of not paying, it has quickly been recognized as, hey, we've got a problem here, so we have to deal with it. So let's just figure out the best way, the most fair way we can. Everybody has bills to pay, including the landlord who has to pay the lender, and the lender has bills to pay too. They have to service their constituents. So let's just figure out how to deal with it. And that's really what I think the industry as a whole is doing. Easier to say when you're, say if you have a grocery anchored strip center where the grocery store is paying rent and a few of the tenants aren't. Very easy to say that. Harder to say when it's a hotel and you have, zero revenue coming.
Yeah. Are you finding any tenants just walking away, and do you see an increase in bankruptcies at all? Either of you?
I think it's coming. Certainly there's been some reports of local businesses that and specifically restaurants that said, hey, we're done. And I think we're just very much on the front end of that. And, programs like the Paycheck Protection program will help, get us through a defined period of time. But if things haven't changed, pretty dramatically from where we sit today, I think that bankruptcy attorneys are going to be very, very busy as our loan workout specialists, and a lot of other leasing and other opportunities. I think we'll come back behind that. So yeah, it's coming.
No question about it. I think that would echo exactly what Paul said. Just to add a little more flavor to it, if someone was if a tenant or a business was marginal going into it, they're probably going to get, completely wiped out here. If they were strong and have the staying power, we'll all figure out how to work through it. But if the will to operate goes away, then there's nothing to do about it. And this can provide either a real reason or a convenient excuse.
Other than the Paycheck Protection programs, are there any other governmental assistance programs, either at the federal or state or local level, that are available to landlords and tenants? Which either of you are aware?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the Fed has a Main Street lending program that's it's for anywhere from $1 million to $25 million. It's meant to target middle market businesses. We've not seen a lot of traction there yet, because I think it skews more towards the larger organizations versus the lower middle market. And we see a big divide between a company that doesn't qualify for the PPP, say they've got more than 500 employees, but yet they've got less than 1,000, less than 1,500. So I think that middle market client, unless they're in a industry that's doing really well right now, is going to be susceptible for the long term, because there really isn't anything that's available. Obviously, stimulus checks will help, and certainly we've seen a lot of those hit our clients' bank accounts. But again, that's temporary. The engine of the economy does need to start up again, or come fall, we're going to be probably faced with a more significant situation than we're sitting at right now.
Yeah, it might be interesting to talk a little bit, maybe it's going to later on in the discussion, but talk a little bit about what each of us see as that startup, what that really looks like, because it's not as if the all clear sign sounded and everybody heads back to normal. And what we were doing, a month and a half ago, it is going to be a phased and a different type reentry, I believe.
Yeah.
Keith, what kind of lease modifications are landlords offering to tenants?
Well, there's a series of different discussions that are going on, and there's not I wouldn't say there's a one size fits all, but in general, the discussion has been about deferral of 90 days worth of rent. That coincides, not coincidentally, it coincides probably absolutely with what the lenders are looking at in terms of a 90-day interest-only or other period. So 90 days deferral of rent, paid back either over a 12-month period or by the end of the year in certain installments without interest. So that's kind of a plain vanilla look. There's other matters of if you pay your side charges, your triple nets, your expenses in addition to in the rent. If you only pay your expenses, could you get a little bit longer, a break? Yes. On my call the other day with ULI, as some of the other landlords are taking a different approach, which is kind of interesting, which is, hey, instead of tacking it onto the end and worrying about whether you're going to collect it or not, what about if you gave someone a discount for each month they paid for the next 30 days, or the next 90 days? So let's say you owe $100 in rent. Maybe if you'll pay $75, you get the money in the door. You don't have to worry about collections. You don't have to worry about lease modifications and all that kind of stuff. So kind of a temporary discount for paying on time, for doing what you're supposed to do. I mean, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but yet it may be the smart way in that you're not deferring, you're not adding on later on. If tenants are able to pay and they just need a break, perhaps that's a way of going about it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any effect of a lease modification on the federal relief incentives and packages that are available?
I don't know. I really don't.
You had talked a little bit about the different kinds of asset types: hotels, retails, industrial warehouse, office. How do you see those different ones playing out? Well, I assume the impact of coronavirus is different on each.
Right. It has been. So I would say the office world is the least hard hit right now. With respect to, what's been the hardest hit is certainly a hotel or hospitality, followed by restaurant and retail. I think that the hospitality will be kind of the first to kind of come back, really, when you get down to it, because when people do start traveling again, they will start staying in hotels. There will be that demand is going to be there. And I think although the second hardest hit is retail, I think that will be the last to recover. And that's for a few reasons. In a broad sense, retail over the last 7 or 8 years has been built on entertainment. It's been built on being internet proof. It's been built on getting together and being in large, crowded, really cool spaces with lots of people. I mean, that's what retail has been about for the past 10 years. Well, the virus is blowing that up. It's turned all that upside down. So you have an industry that's built on being together and providing something that the internet can't provide. And for that reason, it's going to take a long time for that to come back. When's the next time you'll want to go into a crowded mall? When's the next time you'll want to go into a movie theater that someone sat in, either sitting next to you or sat right there in the seat that you're in there before? I mean, all of that entertainment, all of that internet-proof world that retail is going to take some time, and it's not going to be forever, but it will take some time before one gets back to some semblance of what it was, 2 months ago.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. If you think about it, as Amazon was driving retailers out of real estate, what came back in was more special purpose uses, 24-hour fitness and other gyms and climbing walls, and again, great repurpose of real estate, but it involves bringing people together, which is what the virus is causing us, not to want to be together. So I think that I agree that that's going to be some of the hardest hit. It is the hardest hit, slowest to come back. I will say also that I think industrial, and warehouse is holding up pretty well. We recently did a deal with a client who brought Amazon in and had a very nice lease long term. Amazon's putting in all their own TI, and so I think that has held up and likely will continue to hold up pretty well as we go through the COVID pandemic.
Okay, as we finish up here, I want you to put your warm up your crystal balls a little bit and put your Johnny Carson hat on. And
you're showing your age.
Okay, yep. I'm showing my age. Short, medium, and long term, how do you see this virus changing things in the retail industry and hotel industry in particular?
Well, I think in the short term, it's going to continue to wreak havoc on those most susceptible, being hotels, retail, and restaurants. And then as we slowly, open the country back up, I think social distancing, within a restaurant becomes very hard, but it's doable. I think that as Keith alluded to, it's not as easy to do in a movie theater, and I think that we'll slowly begin to assemble again. But I'd say medium term, you'll start to get clients to come back, and then long term, I think some of the businesses will certainly go out of business, but we may see categories that are eliminated as well. Where we just realize that either the risk or our we've just changed habits and don't want to go to a crowded venue to hear that band, and maybe we're doing it virtually as well. So I definitely think there's going to be some lasting implications. Can't necessarily pick all the winners and losers, but this is significant enough, and and potentially generational changing, where we're going to do things differently than we have up to this point.
Yeah, from that was a great summary, and the benefit of going last is I get time to think about the answer. But two things that you didn't mention, but I'm sure that are on your mind and that are absolutely keys, is testing and a vaccine, right? So if and when there becomes widespread testing, where individuals can know whether they've they had the antibodies, whether they've had the virus before, who is and who doesn't. But one would feel very different if I would feel very different. I'd still practice social distancing and be very cognizant, but I'd feel very different if I knew that I already had it, was asymptomatic and recovered, because then I really wouldn't have the same concerns. So multiply that times 1 million people in Kansas City. So if that we'd have a different situation. And then with respect to a vaccine, when that even though that's 12 months away, but when that is there, then of course you feel very, very different. So until such time as you have the intermediate step of testing and knowing where the population stands and knowing where one stands within the population, and until such time in the long term when you have the vaccine, it really is going to be a piece together, trial and error, slowly reopening, sitting every other table type situation. But if you could accelerate any of that, you'd accelerate the recovery.
Well, as bankers and real estate owners, when you're assessing risk going forward, regardless of whether we solve the COVID-19 problem, is this just like a harbinger of things to come, that we may be facing future pandemics because of the interconnected nature of the world these days? And if so, then how do you look at things in terms of risk assessment?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I suspect that us dealing with another pandemic on the horizon is probably not too far off. And so I think what we will have been better prepared, certainly the next time around, in terms of not only a protocol that's established, but also from a testing and from masks and where are they, and looking at your supply chain. So I think that things will change pretty dramatically in terms of how we look at doing business. And by we, I mean just businesses across the country. So that you're only as strong as your weakest link, in the supply chain. And there's a lot of masks that are sitting on docks in Hong Kong. I was talking to a friend early today that had ordered masks and is in the hospital industry, and yeah, he paid for them, and they're sitting in Hong Kong. He can't get them here, and so things like that will be lessons learned, so that when we do go through this again, we'll be better prepared, and then hopefully we can avert some of the things that we've experienced with the COVID-19.
Yeah, there's a saying that a loan commitment is nothing more than a compilation of all your prior mistakes, and so the industry will it'll take it into account. It'll become a little smarter, but I don't see it as this is it's a serious change in direction. But the industry as well as society will change that. It will change. It will change in that direction. It'll accept what it needs to in terms of understanding and taking it into account, for its next move or its next investment. But I don't. If we were 3 years beyond this, I'm not sure. Other than perhaps your retail mix on how much you rely on togetherness as part of your, as part of your security, part of your tenant mix, I'm not positive 3 years from now that it will have, certainly won't have the same systemic effect that it's having today.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate your taking your time today. This has been a great discussion, and I appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, David. Yep.